Welcome to the Insight Meditation community of Charlottesville, Virginia. You can find all of our program offerings and information about our Sangha at www.imeditation.org. We meet weekly on Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, currently on the Zoom platform for meditation and a Dharma talk given by one of our teachers. We also meet daily at noon Eastern Time on Zoom for sitting practice. We hope you can join us.
O nobly born, plant seeds of compassion and let go into the spacious awareness that contains all things. Be here in the eternal present. Let this be your resting place, your safety, your home. We take refuge in this practice. We keep showing up because we have some confidence that our practice of mindfulness makes things better. It helps us make sense of this life, as Pat says. So tonight, I want to plant a few seeds, reminders of how our meditation practice is nourishing wisdom and compassion in this difficult time. I humbly hope that it will be of some benefit. I want to begin with a quote from a storyteller named Martin Shaw. He says, "When a people are in crisis, the things right in front of us hypnotize us. Things at the very edge are where the genius lies." So when a people are in crisis, the things right in front of us hypnotize us, and things at the very edge are where the genius lives. And we can get focused on solving problems, maybe on looking to those in authority or for answers or trusted teachers to help us make sense of a difficult time. Yep. What I heard from our gathering last Tuesday night was wisdom and strength and pain and sorrow and compassion and equanimity. And that came from the entire Sangha. That we each have our own views and our perspectives and our questions. And our life stories give us perspectives. They're unique, they're valuable. And at the very least, that's how we see it. So there's no one source of truth. We're all making meaning together. And I think that we all go through life creating stories that make sense out of our lives. They help us see the trajectory of where we've been. They help to inspire us about where we might be in the future. We create family stories that give us common memories and ways of understanding. They're our roots. And sometimes I tell my family stories, which tend to be irreverent, and I really wonder what people hearing those stories must think about my family. For our stories make sense from the inside, with all of our own perspective and the characters and knowing everyone. But the stories that others carry with their own background and own perspective and own conditioning, naturally we don't always understand things in the same way. So perhaps we need to ask, I didn't realize you felt that way. How did you come to that? So creating truth-telling opportunities, as we did last Tuesday night, as we will again tomorrow with the Hear Committee, so that we can hear one another. So here's a lighthearted story that I borrowed from Jack Kornfield, who read from this poem called Little Movies by David Kirby. Did you know that even aliens love stories? The woman who claims to have interviewed the alien whose ship crashed in Roswell, New Mexico in 1947 said the creature's favorite books were Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Don Quixote, and 1001 Nights. All stories of great spirit, great power, great images. Tom Petty says, a good song should give you a lot of images. You should be able to make your own little movie in your head to a good song. And the same is true of stories. A man had a peacock, says playwright Tom Stoppard. And the man was shaving one morning, and in the mirror he sees the peacock atop the garden wall and about to jump to the other side. So the man drops his razor and races out just as the bird reaches the motorway and starts to leg it to God knows where. And he catches it after 100 yards or so and puts the peacock under his arm and starts home. So the story ends happily. But in the meantime, a good half-dozen cars have sped by, and their occupants have seen a man clad only in pajama pants, his face covered by shaving cream, carrying a peacock. And what did they think? That the man lost a bet on a rugby match, perhaps, and now has to walk from Whitby to Berwick-upon-Tweed with the foam on his face and the bird under his arm? Or that he belongs to a cult religion that worships shaving, partial nudity, and peacocks, and he's on his annual pilgrimage? Or that he's been slipped a powerful drug by his wife's lover, who's sending the man out in the world in this way so that he'll appear deranged and spend the rest of his days in a care home while the two lovers squander the man's considerable fortune. All lives end the same way. Between the start and the finish, it's the stories that count. So there it is. A man, pajamas, no shirt, shaving cream, and a peacock. All the rest is a story. I'm thinking of the stories that we tend to tell. Perhaps we're more likely to assume the best of the man and see him as a hero, or to judge him for his odd appearance and see him for the fool. Perhaps we place ourselves in the story, wanting to save the peacock, or just admire its beauty and wish that we had one. When you bring to mind some of the thoughts that tend to get stuck in your mind, the stories that you tell, what are the kinds of movies you see in your mind? What are the stories that we tell ourselves? Do the stories tend to place us in a certain role? Perhaps we're the self-critic or the judge, the victim or the hero, the sinner or the savior. Maybe we're the compassionate friend in our stories. Do our stories tap into old themes or narratives for us? Or maybe it's something new. I often ask, what am I believing here? And is it true? And I have to ask, is there another, a more generous narrative that we could tell for ourselves and for others? Generous narratives are stories that might allow for a kinder interpretation of what's happening. They allow grace and compassion for our own views of ourselves, and they allow us to respect others' views. Generous narratives allow us to understand that we all act out of our conditioning and that we're human. And they can cut through our tendency to self-criticism or judgment of others. Gil Fronsdale phrased it in a different way. He says, when we're mindful of how we're telling a story, we can choose to turn our minds to more wholesome mind states and say no thank you to the unwholesome. Because the wholesome mind states are rooted in three beautiful qualities of mind: generosity, goodwill, and wisdom. And the unwholesome mind states are rooted in clinging, ill will, and confusion or delusion. So we may not be able to choose which mind states arise, but with mindfulness we can see them clearly. And we can choose the wholesome mind states to guide our actions. So generous narratives offer options and openings for seeing ourselves and seeing others in a kinder light, to see things more clearly without the distortion of clinging to our old stories. They may have us trace back how we got here and consider how we want to proceed in a way that's grounded and in tune with how we want to live our lives. I heard an example of this from a woman named Penny Opal Plant. She's a Native American climate activist. And she's one of the teachers for the Eco-Sattva training, teaching Buddhist approaches to addressing the climate crisis. And in her work, protecting native lands and waters from pipeline pollution, it brings her face to face with lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry. So these could be very divisive conversations and negotiations. And she talks about how she finds it critical to approach this work in line with Buddhist teachings and her values. And so she comes to it with an attitude of, I have no enemies. She said it's essential. No enemies. Only people who come from a different perspective. Just understanding that everyone comes to this with their own conditioning. And that includes our personal experience and societal conditioning that may have supported growth and energy consumption for decades. We come with that. So generously understanding the view of others doesn't require us to distort the truth or back down from closely held beliefs. We're just more able to engage sincerely when we understand where we're coming from, and we're open to understanding others' views as well. So when we're activated, our first instinct can be to go to our habitual stories. And when we find ourselves in difficulty, the challenge can be to just be patient and ask, can we just sit with this and experience our hearts and our minds fully and open to the view of others? If we can pause and breathe and open to create space for a more generous narrative, can we then proceed in a way that's more spacious and more in line with our values? Perhaps we can resist the urge to look for immediate solutions and take some time to contemplate. Desmond Tutu, in his book of Forgiving, says that telling the story is an essential part of healing and reconciliation. And he reminds us that the most loving response to one's story is to hold the space for it, to listen and just hold the space for it. This is a poem from that book. To whom shall I tell my story? Who will hear my truth? Who can open the space that my words want to fill? Who will hold open the space for the words that tumble out in fast-cutting shards, and the words that stumble hesitantly into the world unsure of their welcome? Can you hold that space open for me? Can you keep your questions and suggestions and judgments at bay? Can you wait with me for the truths that stay hidden behind my sadness, my fear, my forgetting, and my pain? Can you just hold open a space for me to tell my story? Can you just hold open a space for me to tell my story? Can we hear the sadness and the pain and hold space for it? Compassion comes from our willingness to come close to suffering and not look away. Just offering witness for one another. Holding open a space honors one another's experience. And that's fear or sadness or heartbreak. This is where the wisdom and compassion is found, when we hold the space to allow it to emerge. So when we feel that urgency to know the answer or know what action to take, can we instead pause? Pause and create the space to listen to our own hearts, because we can't hear anyone until we listen to our own hearts. Where am I coming from? Can I open to grace and generosity for myself? What's the most generous narrative I could say about the way I'm feeling right now? And can we open to understanding what's emerging for others? There's wisdom in pausing to contemplate when things are most difficult. Kyra Julingo recently wrote about Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching about the Buddhist concept of store consciousness. The idea is that when we have a question or want to make an important decision, we don't always have the right answer at hand. Our habitual response may be to stew and worry about it and try to push for a solution. But instead, can we plant the seed in the soil of our mind and allow room for the plant to grow? We plant that seed, we water it, and then we go about our daily lives, and we practice coming back to the present moment again and again. And we don't go poking around in the soil and unearth that seed. We allow the seed to sprout and grow and emerge when it has germinated. And in time, wisdom may offer more clarity about how to proceed. And you may have had that experience of trying to make a hard decision and you couldn't figure it out until you set it aside, set it down, turned your attention elsewhere, and the solution came to you with more clarity, more confidence. So can we be present with all of this experience with compassion and allow time and space for the wisdom to grow its roots? As we struggle with change and difficulty in this Sangha, we're feeling that twinge of suffering, that distance between the way things are and the way we wish they would be. And we're experiencing great loss. So how can we practice in a way that doesn't add to the suffering? Maybe allowing ourselves and others the space and the grace to notice how we're experiencing these times. Allowing the most generous narratives possible as we sit with our own experience, as we seek to understand others. Remembering that we're all learners, learning life's lessons. But when we hold the space as a community, we're germinating the seeds of wisdom and compassion. And it's the genius of this community when we hold the space as a Sangha. So to close, I'm going to read from the wonderful book, Braiding Sweetgrass, just because I think it helps to remember with gratitude that as we practice, we're supported by our ancestors, by the natural world, by timeless teachings that have been transmitted to us, and we're supported by one another in all of our diversity of views and of stories. As as we gather, we hold space for one another to sit with these teachings. So this is from the Thanksgiving address from Braiding Sweetgrass. And apparently it's a prayer, a Native American prayer, hundreds of years old, said in many ways by many different tribal nations. Today we've gathered, and when we look upon the faces around us, we see that the cycles of life continue. We've been given the duty to live in balance and harmony with each other and all living things. So now let us bring our minds together as one as we give greetings and thanks to each other as people. Now our minds are as one. Standing around us, we see all the trees. The earth has many families of trees who each have their own instructions and uses. Some provide shelter and shade, others fruit and beauty and many useful gifts. The maple is the leader of the trees to recognize its gift of sugar when the people need it most. Many peoples of the world recognize a tree as a symbol of peace and strength. With one mind, we greet and thank the tree life. Now our minds are as one. We're thankful for the powers we know as the four winds. We hear their voices in the moving air as they refresh us and purify the air we breathe. They help to bring the change of seasons. From the four directions they come, bringing us messages and giving us strength. With one mind, we send our greetings and thanks to the four winds. Now our minds are one. We gather our minds to greet and thank the enlightened teachers who have come to help throughout the ages. When we forget how to live in harmony, they remind us of the way we were instructed to live as people. With one mind, we send greetings and thanks to these caring teachers. Now our minds are one. So may our wholesome intentions guide us, guide our speech, our effort, our actions, and support this Sangha. We have a few moments if anybody has any reflections on our practice or this evening. I welcome you to share with one another.
Marylouise, it's a question. Could you say a little bit more? I've heard this phrase so much in our Sangha, in the teachers, about hold the space, hold the space. Well, after it just seems so abstract to me. Does that mean just listen with an open mind? Does it mean allow the person to talk? I mean, hold the space. That's very much I don't know. It's not very literal, it's figurative, but say some more about that, would you please? Thank you.
Yeah, Linda, I think the place it came home for me was in when I was doing meditation in small groups, maybe with just another person or a couple of people. And sometimes when we share in our groups, we'll do this, where the intent isn't for one person to start and everybody should go back and forth and express their opinion or discuss or suggest or fix it for them. Sometimes we ask that we just share and the people around us listen with open hearts, with compassion, to hear, and just knowing that you're being heard. without interruption, without correction, without, a give and take, sometimes can really be such a gift. It's that friend who says, "Oh, what's going on, babe? Tell me what's happening." And then is quiet and allows you to do it. Because you really have a lot you have to say. You need to get it off your chest. And it's a real gift when people do that for each other. When they just hold that space and allow us to think it through, feel what we're feeling, without saying, "Oh, you get over it. You'll be all right." We don't have to fix anything. So holding that space for ourselves is allowing ourselves to feel what we feel without having to make it stop or fix it. Sometimes it's just sitting and opening for long enough that we can say, what's going on there? What is that feeling I'm feeling in my chest? And if we wait and listen with an open heart, sometimes we are able to give ourselves some answers. So it's all those things. It's listening deeply with lots of love. And others may have an experience or a description of that. Please feel free to jump in.
Marylouise, I may just add to what you said from a here kind of perspective. Just for me, also holding space means having a safety container, so that it's not infinite space. It's a space that feels like you can breathe in it, that it makes sense as a space. Meaning, for example, tomorrow night we're going to do some small groups, and we'll talk about confidentiality, that people share wholly of their heart, but that what's shared doesn't get just talked about outside that space. So that's an example too of holding space, is having agreements about what makes that a safe space.
Beautiful. Thank you, Julie. Yeah.
Marylouise, I just wanted to thank you from my heart for what you shared. It really made a lot of sense to me and opened doors and windows. So thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Beautiful Dharma talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marylouise, I heard recently, and maybe it was here, so I may be repeating something, that to listen deeply, that I have not listened deeply enough. How does it go? I listen deeply when I'm willing to be changed by what I hear.
Ooh.
I listen deeply when I'm willing to be changed by what I hear. And I think that's kind of the radical welcome of hearing that you're talking about.
Mm. Wow, beautifully put. I was so moved by the poem in Desmond Tutu's book that I was sure that somebody would ask about that. And I'm moved to say it again because I think it's so beautiful. So is it okay if I read that poem again? Okay. And it doesn't have a name, or I give it to you. He said, "To whom shall I tell my story? Who will hear my truth? Who can open the space that my words want to fill? Who will hold open the space for the words that tumble out in fast cutting shards, and the words that stumble hesitantly into the world unsure of their welcome? Can you hold that space open for me? Can you keep your questions and suggestions and judgments at bay? Can you wait with me for the truths that stay hidden behind my sadness, my fear, my forgetting, and my pain? Can you just hold open a space for me to tell my story?